Thank you so much for meeting with the JLA. How would you describe your most recent article to a public audience?
Hello. So, my most recent article, Imperialism Without Prestige, is about language politics in Lithuania and in the Baltic states. And it really started with a question, a puzzle that I found interesting. Specifically, when you look at European imperialism, usually imperial languages such as English or French or Spanish or Portuguese have higher prestige than local languages spoken by local populations. And actually, in the process of decolonization, it takes local populations a while to reclaim the value of their languages. But in the Baltic states, in the region that I studied, the situation is reverse. So actually, the imperial language, Russian, which was imposed on this region for a couple of centuries, first by Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union, which is the language that's associated with political control. Um, for a while in that area is actually has less prestige and is considered backward and uncivilized and vulgar in many ways. So I found that an interesting puzzle because actually local languages such as Lithuanian that I'm focusing on in this article, but also Latvian and Estonian, I think there is very similar processes, are frequently considered more kind of civilized, more prestigious than the Russian language. So that's one part of the puzzle that I'm trying to figure out, and my answer has to do with various political histories in the region and the fact that there were different political alternatives, whether linked to Germany or Poland, and links of the Baltic states to the West prior to imposition of Russian rule. Um, but another situation that prompted my interest in this question of language was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because that process also prompted a lot of importance, a lot of attention to language and linguistic decolonization in the Baltic states. A shift away from Russian language contributed to negative associations linked to Russian language and to the speakers of Russian language and various kind of moves, efforts to move away from use of Russian language, which created a paradox actually for individuals who were Russian speaking in the area, whether because they grew up during the Soviet regime, whether because they were part of ethno-linguistic minorities, or because they were refugees from Ukraine, for example, or political refugees from Russia. So certainly language is again at the forefront of politics in Lithuania, and Lithuania is actually spoken more widely than before because of inflow of individuals from Ukraine, but to a smaller extent from Belarus and Russia. Um, and another aspect that I found really interesting is this question of time and temporality. So basically, there's this symbolic geography that makes languages that are spoken more to the Western part of Europe appear more modern and civilized, and languages such as Russian, especially because of associations with aggression and so on, as actually backward and stuck in time. So there's this interesting idea about people speaking different languages as if they belong to different times and they're not quite modern. And I think the final point that I'll make is that we tend to pay a lot of attention, and rightfully so, for example, to discourses emanating from Russia, which should be analyzed and should be critiqued. But we also look at what's going on in Europe and in the United States because they're such important political actors. But I wanted to argue that there's a lot of interesting resistance strategies emanating from Lithuania and the Baltic states, smaller political actors that may be not as large geopolitically, but nevertheless, they have a lot of agency in defending their own sovereignty and democracy, which are very important to them.
Awesome. Thank you so much.